The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of the eternal dawn like wounded animals. Red lights bathed everything in an angry glow as the massive Federation flagship shuddered violently. In the main engineering bay, sparks flew from control panels while alien crew members ran back and forth in panic. Admiral Corvin felt his four hearts beating rapidly as he gripped the command console. His blue-scaled hands trembled slightly. The Altarian had commanded starships for over 40 standard years, but he had never seen anything like this. Every system on the ship seemed to be failing at once. "Report," he barked at his bridge crew. The Zentari communications officer looked up from her station with wide black eyes. "Sir, we have cascade failures in 17 different systems. The quantum drive core is showing dangerous instability readings. Life support is down to 60% capacity and falling." Corvin's long neck stretched as he turned toward the main view screen. Outside, the deadly asteroid field of the Carrack system loomed closer. Without engines, they were drifting helplessly toward the jagged rocks that could tear their ship apart. "What about the AI systems?" he demanded. "All primary. Artificial intelligence networks are offline, sir. The backup systems keep shutting down as well," replied the navigation officer, a tall being with gray skin and no visible mouth. The Admiral felt a chill run through his scaled body. The Eternal Dawn was the most advanced ship in the Federation fleet. It carried the latest technology from 12 different species. The Vorthak had provided their precision engineering systems. The Hegemony had installed their logical processing units. The Draxi had contributed their energy management protocols. Every piece of equipment on this ship represented the best that galactic civilization could offer, and now it was all failing. "Sir," came a voice from behind him. Corvin turned to see Chief Science Officer Tilvan approaching. The tall, thin being moved gracefully despite the chaos around them. "We have diagnostic teams from every species working on the problems, but they cannot find the source of the failures." Corvin nodded grimly. "What about our repair capabilities?" "Limited, sir. The fabrication units are offline. Most of our advanced tools are not functioning. The engineering teams are working with backup equipment only." The ship shook again, more violently this time. Several crew members stumbled and grabbed onto nearby surfaces for support. The lights flickered ominously. "Time until we reach the asteroid field?" Corvin asked. "At current drift speed, approximately 4 hours, sir. 4 hours to fix problems that the best engineers in the galaxy could not even identify." Corvin felt his confidence cracking. In all his years of service, he had always been able to rely on superior Altarian technology and the advanced systems of their allies. But now, when it mattered most, everything was failing them. "Sir," Telvin said quietly, "there is one option we have not considered." Corvin looked at his science officer with curiosity. "What option?" "The humans, sir. They have an engineering team aboard." The Admiral's expression darkened. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Federation, barely accepted 10 years ago. Most species still considered them primitive. Their technology was crude compared to what the older civilizations had developed. They used simple tools and basic methods that seemed almost barbaric to advanced beings. "Humans?" Corvin repeated with disgust. "What could they possibly do that our best engineers cannot?" "Perhaps nothing, sir, but we are running out of alternatives." Corvin looked around his bridge. The situation was getting worse by the minute. The life support readings showed oxygen levels dropping steadily. The ship's hull was starting to stress from the uncontrolled drift. In the distance, the asteroid field waited like the jaws of some massive beast. "Where is their team?" he asked, reluctantly. "Deck 7, Engineering Section C. They have been assisting with routine maintenance." The Admiral closed his eyes for a moment. His pride rebelled against the idea of asking humans for help. What would the other species think? What would his superiors in the Altarian fleet say? But as another violent shudder ran through the ship, he realized that pride meant nothing if they were all dead. "Contact them," he said finally. "Tell them we need their assistance." 20 minutes later, Chief Engineer David arrived on the bridge with 2 other humans. Corvin was surprised by their appearance. They were smaller than most other species, with pale skin and strange hair growing from their heads. David wore a simple gray uniform that looked almost plain compared to the elaborate clothing of the other crew members. "Admiral," David said with a respectful nod. "I understand you have some technical difficulties." "Technical difficulties?" Corvin repeated. "Our entire ship is failing. Every advanced system we have is shutting down. Our best engineers from 12 different species cannot solve the problem." David looked around the bridge, taking in the flashing warning lights and the worried faces of the crew. "May I ask what approaches have been tried so far?" Telvin stepped forward. "We have run complete diagnostic scans on all major systems. We have analyzed the quantum core resonance patterns. We have checked all power distribution networks using our most sophisticated equipment. We have applied standard repair protocols from every major civilization." The human nodded thoughtfully. "And what did you find?" "Nothing," Corvin admitted with frustration. "Every system appears to be functioning within normal parameters when examined individually, but somehow they keep failing." David exchanged glances with his two team members. "Admiral, with your permission, we would like to take a different approach." "What kind of approach?" "A simpler one. We would like to examine the ship using basic tools and manual inspection methods." Several bridge officers made sounds of disbelief. The Zenthari communications officer actually laughed. "Basic tools? Manual inspection? This is the most advanced starship in the galaxy." David remained calm. "Sometimes the most advanced systems develop the most complex problems, and sometimes simple methods can reveal what sophisticated scanners miss." Corvin felt his patience wearing thin. But what choice did he have? "Very well. You have access to whatever you need. But understand this, human. We have less than 3 hours before we hit that asteroid field. If your primitive methods fail, we all die." David smiled slightly. "Admiral, we have never met a problem we could not fix somehow. We may not do it elegantly, but we will keep this ship flying." As the humans left the bridge to begin their work, Corvin wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Around him, his advanced crew continued their sophisticated analyses, while the ship drifted ever closer to destruction. The fate of everyone aboard now rested in the hands of the galaxy's most primitive species. The klaxons continued to wail, and time continued to run out. Deep in the bowels of the eternal dawn, David crawled through a maintenance shaft that most other species found too narrow to navigate. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness as he examined power cables with his naked eyes. Behind him, his teammate Lisa followed with a simple handheld device that beeped occasionally. "What are you reading on the multimeter?" David called back. "Power fluctuations in the tertiary grid." "Nothing major, but the pattern is weird," Lisa replied. Meanwhile, in the main engineering bay above them, the alien repair teams continued their sophisticated work. The Vorthak engineers had deployed quantum scanners that could analyze molecular structures. The hegemony technicians used logic processors that could calculate millions of possible failure scenarios per second. The Draxi energy specialist had equipment that could measure power flows down to individual electrons. But David had chosen the simplest tools available: a flashlight, a basic multimeter, and his own senses. "This is ridiculous," muttered engineer Corvex, a tall Zenthari with 4 arms and metallic skin. He watched in disgust as David emerged from the maintenance shaft covered in dust and oil. "That human is crawling around like some kind of primitive animal, while we use precision instruments." His partner, a crystalline being named Quendel, agreed. "Their methods are embarrassing. How can they hope to solve problems that our advanced systems cannot even identify?" David ignored their comments and moved to another section of the ship. He placed his hand on a large pipe and closed his eyes. The aliens watched in amazement as he remained perfectly still for almost a minute. "What is he doing now?" Corvex whispered. Lisa, who had climbed out of the maintenance shaft, explained patiently, "He is listening to the ship. Human senses can detect vibrations, temperature changes, and sounds that your instruments might miss." "Listening to the ship?" Quendel's crystal body rang with harmonic laughter. "Ships do not talk, human." "Everything talks if you know how to listen," David said quietly. He opened his eyes and looked directly at the crystalline being. This pipe carries coolant to the quantum core, but the flow pattern is wrong. There should be a steady pulse, but instead there is an irregular rhythm. He moved to another pipe and repeated the process. Then he knelt down and actually smelled the air near a ventilation grate. Several aliens made sounds of disgust at this primitive behavior. "Tom," David called to his third team member, who was examining electrical panels with nothing more than a simple voltage tester. "What are you finding in the power distribution network?" Tom looked up from his work. "Intermittent voltage drops in sections C through F. They happen in a pattern, but not one that matches any standard system cycle." David nodded and pulled out a piece of actual paper and a pen. The alien stared in shock as he began drawing diagrams by hand instead of using computer systems. "Are you seriously making drawings on paper?" Korvex asked with disbelief. "We have holographic projection systems that can create three-dimensional models." "Paper does not malfunction," David replied simply, continuing his sketching. For the next hour, the humans continued their basic examination of the ship while the aliens pursued their high-tech approaches. The contrast was striking. Where the other species used scanners, sensors, and sophisticated analytical equipment, the humans used their hands, eyes, and simple tools. David crawled into spaces others could not reach. Lisa tapped on metal surfaces and listened to the sounds they made. Tom traced electrical circuits manually, following wires with his fingers when his basic instruments showed anomalies. The alien engineers grew more frustrated as their advanced diagnostics continued to show normal readings on individual systems, even as the ship's overall condition continued to deteriorate. "This is impossible," declared Chief Engineer Valdris, a six-legged insectoid being with compound eyes. "Every component tests within acceptable parameters. The quantum core shows proper resonance. The life support systems show adequate function. The power grid shows stable distribution, yet the ship continues to fail." "Perhaps," David said, looking up from his hand-drawn diagrams, "the problem is not with any single component." The aliens turned to look at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to irritation. "Explain," commanded Valdris. David spread his paper drawings on a nearby table. They were crude compared to holographic displays, but they clearly showed the relationships between different ship systems. "Each of your diagnostic scans examines one system at a time," David explained. "Your quantum scanners look at the drive core, your power analyzers look at the electrical grid, your atmospheric processors check life support, but none of you are looking at how these systems interact with each other. Interaction analysis requires complex mathematical modeling," said Quendel. "Our computers can handle such calculations." "But your computers are also failing," Lisa pointed out. "So you need to think without them." David traced lines on his diagram with his finger. "Look at these patterns. The power fluctuations that Tom found happen every 43 seconds. The coolant flow irregularities that I detected occur every 43 seconds. The life support, pressure variations that you have been seeing also happen every 43 seconds. The aliens leaned forward to examine the simple paper diagram. "The timing cannot be coincidental," David continued, "but none of your individual system scans would show this pattern because each scan focuses on only one system at a time." Valdris's compound eyes focused intently on the human's crude drawings. "You are suggesting that the three systems are somehow synchronized in their malfunctions?" "More than synchronized. I think they are causing each other's problems. The power fluctuations affect the coolant pumps. The coolant irregularities affect the quantum core. The core instabilities affect the power distribution. And the cycle repeats and gets worse each time." "A resonance cascade," whispered Valdris. "But such a phenomenon should have been predicted by our design algorithms." "Only if your algorithms were programmed to look for it," Tom said. "Sometimes problems develop that no one expects." "But how could we miss such an obvious pattern?" asked Korvex. David looked around at the sophisticated equipment surrounding them. "Because you were too busy looking at the trees to see the forest. Your tools are incredibly advanced, but they are also very specialized. Each one is designed to analyze one specific thing very precisely, but sometimes you need to step back and look at the big picture with simpler tools. "So what do you propose to do about it?" Valdris asked. David smiled. "Now that we know what the problem is, we can fix it. But I warn you, the solution will not be elegant or sophisticated. It will be crude and simple and probably violate half a dozen Federation engineering standards." The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. Their pride rebelled against the idea of crude solutions. But as the ship shuddered again and the lights dimmed further, they realized they had little choice. "What do you need?" Valdris asked reluctantly. "Access to spare parts, basic tools, and permission to make some modifications that your computers will probably call unsafe." "You have it," the chief engineer replied. As David and his team gathered their simple equipment and headed for the ship's critical systems, the aliens watched with a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope. The humans were about to attempt repairs, using methods that seemed primitive and dangerous. But with less than 2 hours until the asteroid field, primitive and dangerous might be their only chance for survival. The question now was whether human ingenuity could succeed where alien sophistication had failed. David stood before a panel that controlled the ship's primary power distribution system. In his hands, he held a piece of kitchen wire and a component salvaged from a broken exercise machine. The alien engineers gathered around him looked horrified. "You cannot be serious," said Chief Engineer Valdris, his compound eyes reflecting disbelief. "That wire is not rated for power grid applications, and that component is from recreational equipment." "It will work," David replied calmly as he began stripping the wire with a simple cutting tool. "The voltage requirements are the same, and the resistance characteristics are actually better than the original part. But the specifications," protested Quendel, his crystalline body humming with distress. "The engineering protocols, the safety margins. Sometimes specifications get you killed," said Lisa, who was busy rerouting coolant lines using tubing from the ship's water recycling system. "Right now we need solutions that work, not solutions that look good on paper." The ship lurched violently as they drifted closer to the asteroid field. Emergency lighting flickered throughout the corridor. In the distance, they could hear other systems failing with electronic screams and mechanical groans. Tom had opened up an access panel to the life support system and was elbow-deep in wiring. He pulled out components that cost more than most planet's annual budgets and replaced them with simple devices cobbled together from spare parts found throughout the ship. "This is madness," whispered Corvex, watching Tom connect atmospheric processors to power cables intended for the ship's kitchen equipment. "Those connections were never designed to work together." "Design is not magic," Tom replied without looking up from his work. "Electrons flow through any conductor. Gas moves through any pipe. Heat transfers through any material. The rest is just engineering preference." David had finished his improvised power regulator and was installing it in the main distribution network. The device looked crude compared to the elegant alien technology surrounding it, but his multimeter showed it was functioning properly. "There," he said, standing back to admire his handiwork. "That should break the resonance pattern in the power grid." "Should break it?" repeated Valdris with alarm. "You mean you are not certain?" "Nothing in engineering is certain," David replied. "You analyze the problem, design a solution, test it, and fix whatever goes wrong. That is how progress works." The aliens exchanged worried glances. Their advanced civilizations had developed precise methods for everything. They used computers to model every possible outcome before implementing any changes. The idea of proceeding without complete certainty was foreign and frightening to them. Lisa had finished her coolant system modifications and was now working on the quantum core itself. She had disconnected several sophisticated monitoring devices and replaced them with simple temperature sensors and pressure gauges. "Why are you removing the quantum resonance analyzers?" asked a Draxi engineer named Thorvin. "Those instruments cost more than a small starship." "Because they are part of the problem," Lisa explained patiently. "They are trying to maintain perfect quantum stability, but they are overcorrecting. Every tiny fluctuation triggers a response that creates bigger fluctuations." She showed him a simple mechanical gauge she had installed instead. "This device just measures pressure. When pressure gets too high, it releases some gas. When pressure gets too low, It allows more gas in. Simple, reliable, and it does not overthink the problem. But what about quantum coherence? Thorvin asked desperately. What about resonance harmonics? What about phase alignment? What about staying alive? Lisa replied, tightening a connection with a basic wrench. Meanwhile, Tom had created what he called a manual steering system. He had connected the ship's navigation thrusters to a control panel salvaged from the gymnasium equipment. The sophisticated computer-controlled flight systems remained offline, but pilots could now steer the ship using simple joysticks and manual switches. This system has no safety interlocks, observed Navigation Officer Keldris, a being with tentacles instead of arms. What if someone makes an error? Then we fix the error and keep flying, Tom said. Better to have imperfect control than no control at all. As the humans continued their repairs, something remarkable began to happen. The ship's systems started stabilizing. The power fluctuations that had been occurring every 43 seconds gradually disappeared. The life support readings showed steady improvement. The quantum core's dangerous oscillations damped down to safe levels. "It is working," whispered Valdris with amazement. "The crude repairs are actually working." "Crude but effective," David said with satisfaction. "Sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution." Admiral Corvin arrived in the engineering section to check on their progress. He looked around at the humans' modifications with a mixture of horror and fascination. Sophisticated alien technology had been bypassed, replaced, or simply disconnected. In its place were simple devices that looked like they belonged in a primitive workshop rather than on the most advanced starship in the galaxy. "Report," he commanded. "Systems are stabilizing, sir," David replied. "We have broken the resonance cascade that was causing the failures. The ship should remain functional for the immediate future." "Should remain functional?" Corvin repeated. "What kind of certainty is that?" "The only kind that matters," David said. "We have fixed the immediate problems and created backup systems for the critical functions. Your ship will not be pretty, but it will fly." Through the main view screen, they could see the asteroid field growing larger, but for the first time in hours they had working engines and steering controls. "Manual navigation is online," reported Tom from his improvised control station. "We have enough power to maintain course and avoid the asteroids." "Life support is stable," added Lisa. "The atmospheric processors are functioning within acceptable parameters." "Quantum drive is operational," concluded David. "It will not be smooth, but it will get us home." Admiral Corvin looked around at the mess of improvised repairs and jury-rigged systems. Everything about it offended his sense of proper engineering. But they were alive, and they were going to stay alive. "Helmsman," he ordered, "take us out of this asteroid field. Use whatever controls are available." As the ship slowly began to maneuver away from danger, the alien crew members stared in amazement at what the humans had accomplished. Using nothing but basic tools, spare parts, and unconventional thinking, they had solved problems that the galaxy's most advanced technology could not handle. "How did you know it would work?" asked Quendel, his crystalline form reflecting the light from David's crude electrical connections. David smiled. "We did not know, but we were willing to try. And when you are willing to try, you can usually find a way to make things work." For the first time since the crisis began, the emergency klaxons fell silent. The red warning lights changed to amber, then to green. The ship was no longer beautiful or elegant, but it was functional. And sometimes, functional was enough, as they cleared the asteroid field and set course for the nearest Federation station. The aliens began to realize that perhaps there was something to be learned from human methods after all. 3 days into their journey back to Federation space, the improvised repairs on the Eternal Dawn were holding steady. But more importantly, something unexpected was happening in the engineering sections. Alien crew members who had spent their entire careers following precise protocols and using advanced instruments were beginning to ask questions about human methods. It started with young engineer Nexus, a Vorthak barely out of technical academy. He found David in the machine shop hand-filing a piece of metal to fit into a damaged circuit housing. "Human David," Nexus said hesitantly, May I ask why you are shaping that component manually? We have precision fabrication equipment that could create an exact replacement. David looked up from his work and smiled. 2 reasons. First, our fabrication equipment is still offline from the cascade failure. Second, sometimes an exact replacement is not what you need. He held up the piece of metal, which was clearly not a standard shape. This housing was damaged by heat expansion. If I put in an exact replacement, it will just get damaged again the same way. But if I make it slightly different with better heat tolerance and more flexible mounting, it will last longer. Nexus's large eyes blinked thoughtfully. But how? Do you know what changes to make without computer modeling? Experience, David replied, continuing his filing. And common sense. Heat makes metal expand, so you design for expansion. Vibration makes connections loose, so you make them stronger. It is not complicated once you understand the basic principles. But what if you are wrong? David set down his file and looked directly at the young alien. Then I fix my mistake and try again. Failure is not the end of the world, Nexus. It is just information that tells you what does not work. This concept seemed revolutionary to the young Vorthak, whose species was taught that failure was shameful and should be avoided at all costs. Meanwhile, in another part of the ship, Lisa was working with Chief Engineer Valdris on a problem with the atmospheric recycling system. Instead of using the ship's sophisticated diagnostic computers, she was teaching him to troubleshoot by following the actual flow of air through the system. Put your hand here, she instructed, guiding Valdris to place his appendage near a ventilation outlet. What do you feel? Air movement, Valdris replied uncertainly. But it seems irregular. Exactly, now listen. Lisa moved to another location and pressed her ear against a large pipe. What do you hear? Valdris imitated her action, looking somewhat ridiculous as his insectoid head pressed against the metal surface. There is a rhythmic sound, like something is obstructed. Right again. Now we trace backwards through the system until we find where the obstruction is located. No scanners needed, just following the evidence. But surely our atmospheric analyzers would be more precise, Valdris protested. More precise, yes, but also more complicated and more likely to break down. Sometimes simple methods are more reliable than complex ones. As they worked their way through the air recycling system, Lisa explained the human approach to problem solving. Instead of relying entirely on instruments, humans used all their senses and basic logic to understand how systems actually functioned. Your sophisticated tools are excellent when they work, she said, removing a clogged filter that their manual inspection had revealed. But tools are just tools. The real engineering happens in here. She tapped her temple. In the quantum drive section, Tom was having a similar conversation with Thorvin, the Draxi energy specialist. The alien had been frustrated by the humans' willingness to modify systems without extensive testing and mathematical analysis. How can you make changes without knowing all the possible consequences? Thorvin asked as Tom adjusted a power coupling by hand, rather than using computer controls. Because knowing all the consequences is impossible, Tom replied. Systems are too complex and the real world is too unpredictable. You do your best to understand the problem, make reasonable changes, and then monitor the results. He showed Thorvin a simple gauge he had installed. This meter tells me if the power flow is stable. If it starts showing problems, I can adjust things or try a different approach. The key is being ready to adapt when things do not work as expected. But adaptation takes time, Thorvin pointed out. Surely it is better to get things right the first time. Getting things right the first time is a luxury, Tom said. When your ship is failing and your crew is in danger, you need solutions that work right now, even if they are not perfect. You can make them perfect later, after everyone is safe. This practical philosophy was difficult for Thorvin to accept. His species had been trained to pursue theoretical perfection in all their engineering projects. The idea of deliberately implementing imperfect solutions seemed wrong. But as he watched Tom's modifications continue to function reliably day after day, Thorvin began to see the value in the human approach. The most significant teaching moment came when the ship encountered a new problem. A section of the hull began showing stress fractures from their rough passage through the asteroid field. The alien engineers immediately began calculating exactly how to repair the damage using proper materials and precise techniques. But David proposed a different approach. We can spend 3 days doing a perfect repair, or we can spend 3 hours doing a good enough repair that will hold until we reach a proper shipyard. But the stress calculations, protested Corvex, the metallurgical analysis, the structural integrity modeling, can all be done later, David said. Right now, we need to stop the cracks from spreading. Everything else is secondary. He showed them how to create a temporary but effective reinforcement using materials available on the ship. The repair was not beautiful, and it would not pass Federation engineering standards, but it would keep the hull intact for their journey home. But what if it fails? Asked Quendel, still uncomfortable with uncertainty. Then we try something else, David replied. The point is not to create perfect solutions. The point is to solve problems as they occur and keep moving forward. As the days passed, more and more alien crew members found themselves drawn to the human engineering team. They watched, asked questions, and gradually began to understand that there was more than one way to approach technical problems. The rigid, by-the-book methods they had been taught were excellent for routine maintenance and planned projects, but when facing unexpected crises or working with limited resources, the human approach of improvisation and adaptation proved more effective. Young Nexus began carrying a basic multimeter like the humans used, learning to diagnose problems through simple measurements rather than complex scans. Valdris started listening to the sounds his ship made, developing an intuitive understanding of its mechanical rhythms. Even Thorvin began making small modifications to systems based on observed performance rather than theoretical calculations. You are teaching us to think differently, Valdris observed during one of their repair sessions. We are teaching you to think simply, David corrected. Your species have developed incredible technical knowledge, but sometimes you forget that engineering is about solving real problems for real people, not about following perfect procedures. But surely there is value in precision and standardization, Valdris replied. Absolutely, David agreed. But there is also value in flexibility and creativity. The best engineers know when to follow the rules and when to break them. As the Eternal Dawn continued its journey home, held together by an increasingly complex mixture of sophisticated alien technology and crude human modifications, the crew began to realize that they were learning something valuable. They were discovering that true engineering skill was not just about having the best tools or the most advanced knowledge, but about having the wisdom to use whatever was available to solve the problems at hand. The humans had not just saved their ship. They had opened their minds to new possibilities. The Federation repair dock at Starbase Epsilon was used to seeing damaged ships, but nothing had prepared them for the sight of the Eternal Dawn as it limped into port. The massive flagship looked like it had been rebuilt by scavengers using spare parts from a dozen different vessels. Crude patches covered sections of the hull. Improvised antennas sprouted from unexpected locations. Systems that should have been hidden behind elegant panels were exposed and connected with simple cables and basic fittings. Chief Repair Officer Dentan, a methodical being with 6 arms and a reputation for perfectionism, stood on the dock staring at the approaching ship with his mouth hanging open. What happened to her? He asked his assistant. Cascade system failure in the Karak asteroid field, sir, the assistant replied, reading from a data pad. According to the preliminary reports, they were repaired using emergency methods. Emergency methods? Denton repeated. It looks like they were repaired by primitive mechanics using scrap metal. When Admiral Corvin disembarked an hour later, he was surprised to find Denton waiting for him with a full inspection team. Admiral, Denton said with barely concealed horror, I need to understand what happened to your ship. Some of these modifications appear to violate every Federation engineering standard we have. Corvin looked back at his vessel with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. The modifications saved our lives, Chief Denton. We had complete system failures that our best engineers could not resolve using standard methods. So you allowed unauthorized personnel to make random changes to critical systems? I allowed human engineers to solve problems that no one else could solve, Corvin replied firmly. And I would make the same decision again. Over the next several days, Dentan's inspection team crawled through every section of the Eternal Dawn, documenting the human modifications with a combination of fascination and shock. Every repair violated multiple regulations. Every solution ignored established safety protocols. Every fix used materials and methods that were not approved for Starship applications, but every modification worked perfectly. This power regulator was built from kitchen equipment, reported engineer Celix, one of Dentan's most experienced technicians. It should not function at all, let alone maintain stable power distribution for a quantum drive system. And yet it does function, Dentan observed, checking the power readings himself. How is that possible? The humans understood the basic principles involved, Celix explained. Voltage regulation is voltage regulation, regardless of what equipment provides it. They ignored the approved component specifications and focused on the actual functional requirements. Similar reports came from every section of the ship. The life support system was running on recycled components that had never been intended for atmospheric processing. The navigation system used manual controls salvaged from recreational equipment. The quantum drive was monitored by simple mechanical gauges instead of sophisticated computer systems. Everything was crude, improvised, and completely outside normal procedures. And everything worked better than the original systems. I do not understand it, Dentan admitted to his staff. By every standard we know, this ship should not be functional. Yet it appears to be more reliable now than it was before the crisis. Perhaps, suggested Celix carefully, our standards are not as comprehensive as we believed. This possibility was deeply troubling to Dentan and his team. Federation engineering standards had been developed over centuries by the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They represented the collective wisdom of dozens of species and millions of engineers. The idea that primitive human methods could be superior to this accumulated knowledge challenged everything they had been taught. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. Word of the Eternal Dawn's unconventional repairs spread quickly through the Federation engineering community. Technical teams from across the galaxy requested access to study the human modifications. Research institutions began analyzing the improvised solutions to understand how they functioned so effectively. The results were surprising and humbling. The human approaches show remarkable efficiency, reported Dr. Kellis, the Federation's chief engineering researcher, in her preliminary analysis. While our standard methods prioritize precision and theoretical perfection, the human methods prioritize practical functionality and adaptive problem-solving. Her full report, submitted to the Federation Engineering Council 3 weeks later, sent shockwaves through the establishment. It concluded that advanced civilizations had become so dependent on sophisticated tools and complex procedures that they had lost the ability to think creatively when those tools failed. We have created a system where engineers cannot function without perfect conditions and unlimited resources, Dr. Kellis wrote. The humans have retained the fundamental problem-solving skills that we have allowed to atrophy. Admiral Corvin was called to testify before the Engineering Council. The chamber was filled with representatives from every major Federation species, all eager to understand how primitive human methods had succeeded where their advanced techniques had failed. Admiral, asked Counselor Venth, a distinguished Altarian, Engineer, do you believe that human engineering methods are superior to our established protocols? Corvin considered his words carefully. I believe that human engineering methods are complementary to our protocols. When our systems function normally, our advanced procedures are excellent. But when facing unexpected problems or working under emergency conditions, human adaptability and creativity become invaluable. But surely you must acknowledge that their methods lack precision and safety margins, pressed Counselor Trallis, a Vorthak who had helped develop many of the current Federation standards. Their methods lack theoretical precision, Corvin agreed. But they provide practical results under conditions where theoretical precision is impossible. I would rather have imperfect solutions that work than perfect solutions that cannot be implemented. The testimony continued for hours with counselors struggling to understand how crude modifications could outperform sophisticated engineering. Finally, Counselor Morthek, an elderly Zenthari, asked the question that everyone was thinking. Admiral, What do you recommend we do with this information? I recommend that we learn from it, Corvin replied. I recommend that we assign human engineers to every major Federation vessel, not as subordinates but as equal partners whose different approach to problem-solving can complement our own. The suggestion created an immediate uproar in the chamber. Several counselors objected that humans were too primitive to work as equals with advanced species. Others argued that their methods were too dangerous to implement on a large scale. But Dr. Kellis stood to support the Admiral's proposal. The evidence is clear. Ships with human engineering teams show improved reliability, faster repair times, and better crisis response. We can continue to rely solely on our traditional methods, or we can evolve our approach to include human innovations. The debate continued for weeks, with engineers and politicians arguing about the implications of accepting human methods as legitimate alternatives to established procedures. Some species threatened to withdraw from joint engineering projects if humans were given equal status. Others began quietly recruiting human engineers for their own fleets. The breakthrough came when the Federation test ship Meridian experienced a complete power failure during a routine mission. Using only traditional methods and approved procedures, the repair teams were unable to restore functionality. The ship drifted helplessly for 6 days until a human engineering consultant was brought aboard. Within 12 hours, using improvised solutions and basic tools, the human had restored power and gotten the ship moving again. The repair looked terrible and violated dozens of regulations, but it worked perfectly. After this demonstration, opposition to human engineering methods began to crumble. If the choice was between following proper procedures and actually solving problems, most practical engineers chose problem-solving. 6 months after the Eternal Dawn incident, the Federation Engineering Council issued new guidelines that officially recognized adaptive engineering protocols as legitimate alternatives to standard procedures. While they did not abandon their sophisticated methods, they acknowledged that flexibility and creativity were also valuable engineering tools. David found himself appointed as the first director of adaptive engineering, responsible for training mixed-species teams in human problem-solving methods. His classes were initially met with skepticism from alien engineers who had been trained to follow precise protocols. But gradually, as they learned to think beyond their traditional limitations, even the most conservative engineers began to see the value in human approaches. They discovered that listening to their ships using simple tools when complex ones failed, and being willing to try imperfect solutions could often achieve better results than waiting for perfect conditions. Engineering, David told his first mixed species class, is not about having the best equipment or the most advanced knowledge. It is about solving real problems for real people using whatever resources are available. Sometimes that means following established procedures. Sometimes it means making up new procedures on the spot. Young Nexus, now assigned permanently to David's team, raised his hand. But how do you know when to follow procedures and when to improvise? David smiled at the question he had been asked dozens of times. Experience, judgment, and the understanding that the goal is not to create perfect solutions, but to create solutions that work well enough to keep people safe and systems functioning. Within a year, human engineers were serving aboard every major Federation vessel. They worked alongside alien specialists, combining human creativity with alien precision, human adaptability with alien knowledge. The ships were no longer as elegant as they had once been, but they were more reliable, more resilient, and better able to handle unexpected challenges. The Eternal Dawn, now fully repaired but still bearing some of its human modifications, became a symbol of this new approach to engineering. Visitors from across the galaxy came to study its mixture of sophisticated alien technology and crude human improvisation. "It is not pretty," Admiral Corvin would tell these visitors as he showed them around his ship, "but it works, and in the end, that is what matters most." The age of perfect, elegant, theoretical engineering had not ended, but it had been joined by something equally valuable: practical, adaptive human engineering. Together, they created solutions that neither approach could achieve alone. The humans had not just saved one ship. They had changed the way an entire galaxy thought about solving problems, and in a universe full of unexpected challenges and Impossible situations that change might be the most important engineering achievement of all.